Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to be sharing with you how to use shadow work to overcome limiting beliefs. Alright, so in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you how to use shadow work to overcome the limiting beliefs, but let's talk a little bit about what the shadow is first and what shadow work is. So the shadow is basically the blind spot of the psyche. It's the aspects of yourself that you've gone selectively unconscious to for a variety of reasons, usually because of traumas, unmet needs, or identity and worldview-based decisions that cause us to fragment off parts of ourselves and push them into the unconscious and to go unconscious to those elements of our personality. Now, what shadow work is when it's the case that we're able to bring those aspects of ourselves back into the light of consciousness. So shadow work is any process that we use to make the unconscious conscious. And so we can use shadow work actually to unwire our limiting beliefs, because we can think about our limiting beliefs a bit like a symptom, and the deeper roots of that being dynamics that are going on in the unconscious that keep us holding on to that belief. Now, what a limiting belief is any belief that you have about yourself or about the world at large or about reality at large that holds you back from doing the things that you want to do and living the type of life that you want to live. And so to be able to use shadow work to let go of your limiting beliefs can really open up a whole world of possibilities to you that currently right now are being blocked by those limiting beliefs. Now, when it comes to letting go of limiting beliefs, it can be a little bit challenging to do because our belief system is so comprehensive and so huge. If we think about what our beliefs are, is essentially it is the entire foundation of our identity and our worldview woven together as one. And so when it comes to unwiring our limiting beliefs, we are actually unwiring our identity or unwiring the platform that our identity sits upon. And so we have a huge incentive to be able to essentially maintain ego homeostasis, and the homeostasis of having the same kind of identity and the same kind of worldview. And so it can be quite difficult to challenge any types of beliefs, even if those beliefs are not serving us. And I'll explain a little bit more about why that is with this metaphor that is the castle in the sky. So if we think about the castle in the sky, it is a floating castle. So it is an incredibly complex structure with no foundation at all. And this is exactly what our belief structure is, because we as human beings are not capable of knowing the truth in an absolute way. And so what we have is we have certain assumption stones that are forming the basis of the foundation of that castle, but those assumption stones aren't connected to anything underneath of them. And so what we have is we have essentially these assumption stone foundations, and then we have also all of these different beliefs that scaffold upon those assumption stones, and we have more beliefs that scaffold upon those, and more beliefs that scaffold upon those, and more beliefs that scaffold upon those. And so this castle in the sky is an incredibly complex structure of different beliefs, and if we just go yanking a belief out from that structure, in the same way that if we took out like the foundation or a support pillar of a house, you can end up with a collapse of meaning. So you essentially, when you have a collapse in this castle in the sky, you can experience worldview collapse, identity collapse, and a whole collapse of meaning, which totally upsets our ability to have homeostasis and to be able to have the necessary meaning to move ourselves forward in life. And this can be very difficult to deal with. So whenever it's the case that we're unwiring limiting beliefs, we want to keep in mind that even if this belief is a problem for us, it might be serving a function, and very likely is serving a function within that greater structure of our identity and worldview beliefs. And so I just want to take a moment to stress to you to be very slow and gradual when you're unwiring your limiting beliefs. And so you want to think about deconstructing your beliefs and letting go of your limiting beliefs in the same way that you would be deconstructing a Jenga tower. So the whole idea within the game of Jenga is to keep the tower upright as you take him out brick by brick by brick. And what you try to do is you try to go for the loose bricks, and then you stack those loose bricks on top of the rest of the tower. And so the idea here is that you don't want to take out a brick that's actually bearing weight within the structure, because the whole entire idea of Jenga is to keep your tower upright. And because the tower, in this sense, is your identity and is your worldview and is your whole entire apparatus for creating meaning, you want to be likewise sensitive to what bricks you take out of that structure. And so you might be like, oh, I don't like this belief that I have over here, so let's take it out. But that could be bearing weight and cause you one of those collapses. And so you want to be very careful. And if you notice that you have a tendency to hold on very tightly to a belief that's not serving you, then understand that there's probably a valid reason why you're holding on to that belief, and that it requires you to explore more deeply or potentially resolve other things before that brick is able to be taken out of the Jenga tower, or before that particular beam is able to be taken out of that castle in the sky. All right, so just really quick, I wanted to share with you that I have a brand new group coaching program called Shadow Work for Self-Sabotage. Right now, it's in its pre-enrollment period. I currently have a bunch of beta testers in the program, and things are going really well with the beta testers, so I'm really pleased about that. And I am having a 10% off sale during my pre-enrollment period between now and July 20th. And so if you would like to meet with me on a discovery call to see if this program is a good fit for you, if you're an ambitious person who wants to use shadow work to unwire your limiting beliefs or other barriers that hold you back from achieving your conscious goals, then go ahead and you can click the link down below to schedule a discovery call with me to see if the program is a good fit for you. All right, so when it comes to letting go of your limiting beliefs through deconstructing the castle in the sky, there's something to understand about the limiting beliefs first, is that sometimes you can have just purely unexamined limiting beliefs, things that you take for granted as true, and then as soon as you hear a truth that, like, let's say contradicts that, you question it and you can let it go, no problem. So you have unexamined limiting beliefs, and oftentimes you can get a lot of quick wins when it comes to letting go of different, let's say, false assumptions and limiting beliefs when you first start out doing inner work. And that's because you're basically doing an inventory of all of your different beliefs on things and the way that you look at things. And as you come to question things that you once assumed to be true and just took for granted to be true, you can oftentimes just kind of clean house, and it becomes like taking out the loose bricks in the Jenga tower. However, when it comes to functional limiting beliefs, which is a different type of limiting belief to the unexamined limiting belief, those functional limiting beliefs, those are the ones that get stuck tight because they're actually serving a function for us. For whatever reason, those like limiting beliefs are either perceived as providing some kind of service or protection to us, or they really genuinely are serving as a protection or service to us, or they're just like they're serving the function of scaffolding up elements of our identity more generally. So to give a quick example of what an unexamined limiting belief might be is, let's say that Jasmine just has an assumption that, oh, in order to make money, you have to have a 9-to-5 job. And if you don't have a 9-to-5 job, you won't be able to make money because no one can make it self-employed anymore. Let's say that that's what Jasmine's belief is. She's not very invested in that belief. It's just something that she's always taken for granted. And then one day she goes kind of questioning into that, and she goes, oh, is that really true? And then she maybe runs across a bunch of people that she knows that are kind of going on a more self-employed entrepreneurial path. And then she realizes, oh, actually that assumption wasn't true. But she wasn't very bought into that assumption, even though it is a limiting belief. It wasn't something that she was necessarily like really invested in like holding up, because it wasn't serving any kind of function for her. And so when she sees evidence in reality that contradicts that belief, she can easily let it go. Now let's say that Jasmine has the same exact belief, only it's a functional belief. So she believes that you can't make money except in 9-to-5 jobs. And let's say it's the case that she holds on to that belief because like part of her would know that she actually wants to start her own thing, and she has to kind of keep believing that that's not a viable path in order to stay in the status quo, because she's afraid of maybe judgment from family members, or she's afraid of losing some element of the status quo. And so right now, that limiting belief that she holds that the only way to make money is through a 9-to-5 is actually a way to try to protect herself from certain uncomfortable scenarios that she's trying to avoid. And in order for her to actually let go of that limiting belief, it'll take more than just looking at the facts of the matter that there are people making money not in 9-to-5s. That won't necessarily do it. Instead, she'll have to look directly at the vulnerabilities that she's trying to protect herself from through just kind of negating those paths of entrepreneurship and self-employment as valid paths or as possible paths, because that's the thing that's keeping her safe right now from the things that she's afraid of. So she has to actually work through that vulnerability. So with that in mind, that there are both unexamined and functional beliefs, I'm going to give you some questions that you can ask yourself that you can use to start to question into and to deconstruct your limiting beliefs. And with these questions, you want to use these as a sort of starting place for a deeper kind of contemplation. So keep in mind that you could answer these questions in a really short way, but you could also go very much in depth. And the deeper you go with it, the more that you're going to understand about your relationship with a particular belief. So what you want to do is you want to select a particular limiting belief that you hold. And then the first step is to ask yourself, when did I start believing this belief? So for example, a limiting belief that I used to hold a lot of limiting beliefs about myself. So I used to believe that I was ugly, that I wasn't capable of things, that let's say I was just inherently unpopular. I had all sorts of different really self-deprecating sort of negative beliefs. Now, one of the things that I would say is that this came from essentially kind of noticing that in movies and things like that, that the good guys tended to be more humble and that the bad guys tended to be conceited. And so I had developed sort of this idea that, oh, in order to be humble and therefore good, I have to be self-deprecating. And so I constructed a lot of limiting beliefs and a lot of self-deprecating beliefs in order to almost prove to myself that I'm the good guy main character of the story. So I would say that I first started believing those beliefs maybe when I was 5 years old, and I first maybe started to be able to conceptualize of things like that. Maybe a little bit later, 6, 7 years old. And then what I would want to do is I would want to go to my next step, which is to ask myself, is this always true? And what I would say is that these particular beliefs, none of them were particularly true. I didn't believe them because they were true. I believed them because they served the function of keeping me good or helping me have an identity of goodness associated with being humble and self-deprecating. And so while I would say that I could pinpoint out dynamics where it's true that I have shortcomings in this, that, or the other area, the beliefs themselves weren't something that I believed on the basis of truth, but more on the basis of the function of serving a particular identity that I wanted to hold. And then step number 3 is to ask, how am I trying to protect or serve myself with this belief? So in my case, this belief was 100% a functional belief meant to protect me from, let's say, shame and the feeling of badness, because there's always been a deeper unconscious tendency to think that I'm bad and to try to prove myself good to myself. So that's a pattern that was playing out. So it's basically the way I'm trying to protect myself is by trying to get away from that sense of badness through having a superior identity of goodness, through being able to be oh, look, I'm so good. I don't think very highly of myself at all, which is the way that my childhood self conceptualized of goodness. Now, when you ask this question, how is this belief meant to protect or serve me? If it's the case that you can't really find an answer for it, or let's say that it seems like this belief is going to shift really easily, chances are that that's a belief that's more unexamined than it is a functional belief. However, if it's the case that its belief is really tenacious, chances are that there is something to be found there in terms of a way that you're trying to protect or serve yourself by holding on to that belief. All right, so the next step is, if you were able to find a way that you're protecting or serving yourself through holding on to that belief, you want to then ask yourself, how can I render that function obsolete? So for example, if I was protecting or serving myself with all these self-deprecating beliefs by trying to solidify an identity of goodness, how can I render that tendency obsolete to where I don't need that tendency? And the way that I ended up actually rendering those beliefs obsolete, like later on, like in middle school, when I got a little bit older, was by letting go of the deeper limiting belief that you have to be self-deprecating to be a good person. So that was where my shift came into play. It's not the only way to shift that dynamic, but once I saw that, oh, like actually humility in this sense and being self-deprecating, it's like all of that is just a show anyway, and it doesn't like actually add to a person's goodness if they're like breaking themselves down. And I can witness a lot of people who are very self-deprecating, but maybe who aren't like, don't have the greatest character on the planet, and so it doesn't necessarily add to that person's sense of goodness in the way that I was conceptualizing of goodness even then. And so that was one of the things that made me shift my dynamic and actually move to the other side of the spectrum, where I maybe even tended to be a little bit too self-celebratory in some ways, but it was a lot better than what was before. Now, a deeper way to render the function of this belief obsolete is to actually go into these deeper shame dynamics relative to these feelings of badness, or this kind of judgment of badness that I've laid onto myself, that I'm trying to use these self-deprecating beliefs to counteract. And so maybe it's even questioning deeper, like, what is it that would actually make someone bad? What is badness? What is that at the deepest level? I can question that. Or maybe I can kind of work towards accepting myself, that even if there was somehow some part of me that was just fundamentally bad, it's like, could I still accept and love that part of myself no matter what? Because basically the whole entire process of having these beliefs that were very self-deprecating was based off of trying to essentially still love myself despite my badness, or to try to redeem myself in some way. And so I'm trying to fix myself and change myself because there's something about myself that I consider to be subpar or bad. And so if I can just embrace those parts of myself, like with shadow work, embrace those parts of myself, then it's the case that I can render those beliefs obsolete without even having to tweak around with the other beliefs about, like, let's say, conceitedness or, modesty, though those were important shifts and everything as well. But there are multiple ways oftentimes to render a particular belief obsolete. And so you want to find one of the ways to do so. And it could be something as as easy as shifting another belief that other beliefs are scaffolded upon, or it can be something where you have to go really deep and sort of heal some deep wounds, like my shame wound. And so basically those are the 4 steps you want to go through. So you want to say, when did I start believing this belief? Is this belief always true? How am I trying to protect or serve myself by believing this belief? And how can I render that function obsolete that this belief is serving? Anyway, so that's all I have for you for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead, click the like button down below and subscribe, and leave me a comment down below. Also, if you are interested in my Shadow Work for Self-Sabotage program, go ahead, click the link down below in the description to schedule a call on my Calendly. I'd be happy to talk with you to see if the program is a good fit for you. And if you would like to learn more about shadow work, go ahead and click this link right here. And until next time, keep becoming more you.